Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Thomas Garbetian, I'm Research Innovation Manager at Solar Power Europe, and I am part of the ETIP steering committee, and I will be moderating today's discussion, ETIP Secretariat, sorry, and I will be moderating this discussion. We will just wait a couple minutes to leave some time for people to connect, and then we will start. Maybe before we actually start, I will just mention that the slides will be shared after the meeting, and the discussions will be recorded, and the recording will be available as well. I also invite you to ask any question that you have via the chat or Q&A function of the webinar tool. And we will dedicate a significant time for questions and answers. Yeah, I think I see that people are quietly connecting. So maybe, Nabi, if you want to already get started with opening the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased and honored sharing that webinar on site harvesting the sun agrivoltaics and happy farming across Europe. I am Nabi Sharadi, ETIP steering committee members and CTO of Desert Technologies. The presentation will be, or webinar today will be shared in two parts regarding the white paper, but before that, I will make a short introduction to what is ETI-PV and what is the aim of that white paper. Next slide, please. So before going to the presentation, I would like to introduce ETI-PV, as I said, which is an independent body recognized by European Community as a representative of the photovoltaic sector. Our activity focus on opportunities and challenges facing the European Community of photovoltaic sector. We make recommendations with a view to improving the competitiveness of the European PV industry, both upstream, including the feedstock supply, ingot wafer, cell and module production, and equipment supply manufacturing also. And the downstream ones, including the technical solutions for grid integration, market solutions for grid integration, and the installations. The steering committee is composed by 30 experts elected every 2 years. Here you have the picture for the last one, I would say, because the mandate's finished on last May. And the composition of the steering committee comes from the industry as well as the academia to take the decision and developing studies that we need. Next slide, please. Okay, so we bring together, as I said, the researcher from the institutes and the industry experts to develop different activities shared in 6 working groups. The LCOE, competitiveness, the integrated, indeed, the white paper of today was developed by the integrated PV working group. The digital PV and grid, that was also the topic of the conference that we hold annually, which is among our activities, the PV industry, social PV, and the reliability and circularity of the PV. So the main activities are strategic research and innovation agenda under the name of SRIA, that is provide an overview of PV research and innovation challenges, objectives, and priorities for the coming years for the European communities. And also we defined the KPIs to reach in the coming years. We also exchange with the PV and research and innovation communities. We do make the liaison between European policymakers and the research and innovation, also dictated by the industry need in order to develop the industry and exchange with national and international research and innovation platforms around the globe. Among our other activities is we develop different study and in the form of publication that we publish regularly through the year. We have white papers, and the white paper today of the Agri-PV was developed through these studies. We also develop the fact sheet for different topics. All these documents could be downloaded from our website. The link will be shown in the chat soon, and you can just click on it and you have the link to download. It's free of charge, and you are welcome to download as much as you want. Also, the other things that I forgot I want to mention is regarding the working group. As I said, that we have a new committee members. We make a call for experts, what we call is, I'll say, external experts. So please keep an eye on our website and our announcement newsletter, where we'll announce the days to apply, and you are welcome to apply to be part from our experts and participating in the working group that you are interested in. Having said that, I would say we'll go now to our webinar. Next slide, please. Yeah, the webinar, which is based from the white paper that has been developed, and here we have a list of authors that I would like to thank very much for their devotion and time to make it happen. It's an interesting work. The survey, for instance, that has been developed is a very meticulous survey that has been developed through different countries in Europe and different communities. The presentation that we're going to have is divided in two parts. One part will consist on presenting the results of the farmer survey by Kay and Bas from TNO. The second part will highlight the Agri-PV technical innovation that will be presented by Sarah from Utrecht University. And then we'll have a discussion through a Q&A that I invite you to write your question in the chat, and our moderator, who is Thomas from ETIP Secretariat, will ask them. And finally, we'll have a short conclusion of the session. And now I will give the floor to our first speaker. And we're going to start with the survey by Kay and Bas. Guys, the floor is yours, and we will follow immediately by Sarah.
Thanks, Nabi, for the introduction. The work I presented was indeed a joint work done by Kai Caesar and also our student Tim Kaasjager, who's pursuing a master's at the TU Delft and does an internship at TNO. Next slide. So I start with by introducing which farmers we visited. So I don't have pictures of them, but we had contact with two Agri-PV locations in Italy, one near Piacenza, where we had the Agrivoltaics conference 2 years ago, and the second one in the south near the city of Bari. Click. Next slide. Oh, no, same slide, but next click. Yeah. We also spoke with two farmers in the south of Germany and in Austria, located in Alt-Hegenenberg and Spital. And finally, we also spoke with 3 farmers from the Netherlands, which would be next click, which are located in a Culemborg solar project in Heuvel and the Agri-PV in Waddenooien and Agri-PV in Babberich. Next slide. So not only do they cover quite a large range of European countries and weather conditions, they also have different crops and farming practices. So if we start with the next slide, click. Then, so Solar Project Den Heuvel is a dairy farm. So he uses the land between the solar for grazing by sheep and cows, but also to harvest green grass or dried grass. The other two locations in the Netherlands are on soft fruits, red currants and raspberries mostly. Next. In Italy, the one in Piacenza in the Po Valley is harvesting mostly grains and corn. And in the south, it's a combination of grains and viticulture, so a vineyard. And then finally, next, in Germany, we have what they call cash crops. So that's a rich grass clover mixture, grains, and maybe other products. And in Austria, final click, it's grassland again, which is used for making silage, so the green grass or dried grass in the form of hay bales. Next slide. Also, they have a full variety of PV systems. The one in Alt-Hegenenberg, showing a Google Maps picture of one part of it, consists of 2 tracker systems. And interestingly, this part that we see has an east-west oriented axis for the tracker system. Whereas the other part, where I don't show a picture, is a standard horizontal single axis tracking system with a north to south axis. Next slide. The Agrivoltaico near Piacenza is actually a double axis tracking system from the company Remtech. It's hard to see on this photo from Google Maps, but if you look very carefully to the road that looks most white, you can actually see these are individual panels with about 1 panel spacing in between, and the panels can rotate along the axis, but also in the other direction, so they can track the sun in 2 directions. Next slide. The 2 systems above the soft fruits in the Netherlands are fixed tilt. They're typically 1 row of PV panels oriented somewhat to the east, somewhat to the west, and they follow the rows of the fruit plants. And then I think the final system that we show, next slide, is a vertical system. Both the grassland Agri-PV in Spital in Austria and the solar project in Heuvel in the Netherlands, they have a vertical PV. You can clearly see the rows of green grass and the paths that the cows and the machines travel on going to the other fields. So a large variety of systems. Then we move on to the actual results from the survey. So if you counted with me, we interviewed 7 farmers. So this is not, of course, a big number. So, but it's all anecdotal. But they seem to have quite some common grounds on their opinions on Agri-PV. So to be clear, we only talked with the farmer that was active on that field. We didn't talk with the project developer or the owner of the PV system, which in most cases was a different entity than the farmer. Both farmers in Italy clearly showed a good effect of the PV as a means to improve the microclimate on their fields. Of course, Italy is a warm country, particularly in summer. Water consumption, droughts are really issues for the farming communities there. So anything that can improve on that is really welcome. One of the 2 systems has also a way of retaining the rainwater, so not let the rainwater go directly to the ground, but really save it for when it's needed. The farmers mentioned the microclimate below the panels is better. They get a bigger harvest or a different harvest. What their points of improvement are or concern are that the construction takes up some of the land. So yeah, as soon as you put anything in the ground, it means you have to drive your tractor around it. They also are unfamiliar with the crop growth when you work in shade. Normally farmers don't work in shade, so they don't really know how their their produce will react to what if it's a cold spring or what is an extremely dry spring. So they really have to develop that. And also they state economical factors like the fluctuations in the production cost and market stability. Moving on to the Germany and Austria, I grouped them together. Both report that they actually continued farming as they used to, so not much change in their practices, particularly in Austria. And the German farmer also mentioned with his cash crops that the trackers protect the crops partially against heavy rain and hailstorms. So those are all very nice, of course. What they also mention as things that should be better, permitting and grid connection. I think that might be standard for PV and not only for Agri-PV. It's very hard to get your permitting organized. It's tiresome. Takes a lot of effort. So that was really a drawback for the Austrian farmer. With cash crops, particular with grains, they have to be ripe. And if they're ripe, you want to harvest them. So you have to control the ripening that it happens at the same time. So particularly at the edges of the crop rows, there was some issues with shade and slower ripening of the crops. They indicated GPS-controlled machinery, which is an advantage as it can nicely travel in between the rows without damaging the PV, is somewhat slower than if you would have a manual operated tractor. And also they indicated the knowledge among their colleagues is quite lacking. From the Dutch farmers, there were 3, so we had to split the positives and the negatives or the improvements on 2 slides. They clearly indicate, particular with the soft roots, that PV is a very good protection for things like hail, heavy rainfall. They also indicate that the labor conditions, a lot of these fruits are picked by hand and under plastic shading that's normally used or plastic cover. It becomes really warm and humid and uncomfortable in summer, whereas the PV shade is actually quite gentle. It's quite nice to be there. Also, I know that from personal experience. And also the dairy farmer indicated that the sheep seem to really appreciate the fact that if they go to the right side of the row, that they have some shadow to hide from during sunny afternoons. The raspberry farmer clearly indicates that, one too fast, please. Clearly indicated that that the lack of shade netting, so you already have the shade from the PV, so you no longer need to put up all these plastic covers, is a really big advantage. They're costly. They break. They could even break the week after you install them when there is a summer storm. So the PV is a much safer protection and of course with a 25-year lifetime, much nicer. And they all mentioned that PV over the crops does a lot with your water. The farmers, the soft fruit farmers, they typically use drip irrigation. So they really measure when the soil says, hey, I'm drying up, and then water is supplied. So they really notice that the soil is not drying out that fast. So there is much less water consumption. The dairy farmer which actually uses extensive farming practices, so he doesn't irrigate his land, says that after a dry period in the summer, the grass starts to grow again much faster between the vertical PV than in the open fields. And they also indicated that it would be nice to have collection of rainwater, just as the Italian colleagues mentioned. Going to the things that are lacking or should be improved, one of the most important points they indicated is that Agri-PV, we talk about Agri-PV, but actually it's 2 things. It's an agricultural practice on the land, and at the same time, someone uses the same land to put on PV panels and generate power. And for a lot of the rules and regulations, Agri-PV doesn't exist. It's agricultural land or it's a solar park. It can't be both. So they really, and that means that sometimes you lose out because you're falling in the wrong category or you're falling in neither category. So, and then in that case, if that's the case, you have a very expensive solar park because you build above fruit trees. That's not really the easiest thing to do. Or you have a farm where all these PV is in the way. So it's really important that Agri-PV is recognized as an entity that needs its own rules and preferentially benefits both from the the benefits from being agricultural land, because that's the main purpose. You have to have that the food production. We have to have the use of the land. But in addition, we want to add the PV because we need also the renewable energy. So the farmers really would like to benefit from the fact that they have solar electricity on their land. And that could be either because they can operate their farms from that electricity, or that they get a financial incentive from the PV owner or PV operator. Next point. They also indicate with the fruit that the yield is somewhat lower, but also they indicate that the fruit is less damaged. So hail damage is a very simple one, but also in bright sunshine, raspberries tend to get sunburned, even in cloudy countries like the Netherlands. So they also see some advantages there. Particularly the dairy farmer is quite conscious of the fact that if he makes a mistake, that the PV can be damaged. A stone could be thrown up by the machinery, or a cow can decide that he has an itch that needs to get rid of. And also so between the fruit there are grass lanes. You like to have that to be grass, because that otherwise it becomes mud. So they like to have the grass, but because there is fewer light due to the PV, the grass growth is slightly less, which has some benefits and some negatives. So that's also something they would like to work out slightly better, get more experience with, to make sure that also those lanes stay accessible. And then finally, maybe some how do you say, some outlooks to the future. Next. The farmers also indicated, hey, it would be really nice if we could market our products. If we can really say, hey, this is not a raspberry from a raspberry plant from the Netherlands, or locally produced, but also it's produced in an Agri-PV site. So it's like a solar raspberry, or whatever you want to name it. And they all indicated there should be more knowledge, both with the farming community, but also with the people that make the rules and the regulations. Policy should be connected, and the risk of making this step should be reduced. And then I think I come to my second to last slide. It's also important to realize the climatic differences. So if you look at the Mediterranean climate, the Po Valley, the south of Italy, water shortage is always there, has always been there. So putting down those panels, putting down those extra shadow elements could have a direct benefit, and your crop quality or your crop quantity can be maintained, if not improved. The farmer in Bari indicated that because of the shading, his harvest is delayed, and that actually yields a better crop. And it even allows him to make sparkling wine, which in the past was never possible with a vineyard without any PV. But if you look at the temperate climates, our hot and dry summers are still very rare. We typically have enough water, and we don't have that much sunshine. So the panels take away some part of the light. So the yield impact is not always, or maybe hardly ever, positive. But there could, of course, be other synergies as well. So we really have to take that into account. There is not a single solution or a single argument to go towards Agri-PV. It really depends on what you do and where you do it. And then the final slide. So yes, there are a few front runners, farmers. They're on board. They're really happy with the system they have. They also indicate we still need more knowledge and experience with it. Farming has developed over 10,000 years, and now within 5 years we decide we go from farming here and PV there. We want to go to Agri-PV. That needs time. Crop rotation of 4 years or even 8 years is common in the Netherlands. So you need at least 8 years before you know what all those 8 crops do. Also, we need to regulate it better. It should be clear that if you have farmland, it's farmland. There's a lot of benefits of having farmland and keeping it farmland for a farming community. But there are also benefits to making Agri-PV or putting PV on your land. So we really should make sure that our legal and financial policies work that way. And sometimes the synergy is not always that obvious or quantifiable. A little bit less fungicide, is that really good? How good or how bad is that? It's hard to to quantify. Of course, if your crop production improves because of the shading, it's not a question. But if you're like, maybe my crop goes down a bit, but I have some other benefits, it's you really have to make a good list of all the positives and the negatives. And finally, it's very clear that like normal agriculture, Agri-PV is not a monoculture. There are very many different flavors and ways of doing that. And Sarah will probably talk about a bit more on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bas. Sarah?
Yes, good afternoon to those who are just joining us from Europe. Maybe good evening to those that they are a bit Eastern, and good morning to the rest. Today, I'm just going to talk about technical innovations that we had so far in Agri-PV. Maybe we are not gathering all of the possible technical innovations, but we're trying to just show you what are the new technical innovative and what are the issues and challenges of these technical innovations. So let's start with a module, and let's start with the modules that are very well known, actually. One of the most well-known photovoltaic modules, we know all of us, I believe that we just heard about it, so we know that solid and rigid solar panel, monocrystalline or polycrystallines are the ones that it's very famous, so it's very popular. It's very easy to use because it's quite well known for the PV developers. And the thing that we can do for this, for instance, we can see in the photo that's in the bottom side, we can just change the density of the solar cells in each module and let the light to get through, and then we can just optimize the amount of the radiation that the crops needed underneath of the solar panel. Also, we can just play with the height of the solar panel. However, we will just see the other type of the solar panel that are possible for the agrivoltaic. For this one, because we have kind of heavy solar panels, we cannot just go to the very high altitude for the mounting system. The good thing is that, so we learned from Bas van Alken that some of the animals, especially sheep and cows, they really would like to get some rest underneath of the shadow, and these type of panels, they can definitely provide us some nice shading for the cattle, for the sheep, and it's actually a good and it's a kind of a bright side of this type of the panels. We can just do the design. We can customize the design very easily for based on the pitch. I will show you at the end of the slides. That's how we just did the calculation, optimizing the design using different pitch for one system, using the same type of monocrystalline panels for a specific land. This one that is very, these days, if you're working in agrivoltaic, you have seen such a view very often. This is a bifacial photovoltaic modules. We know them that it's very good, very actually promising technology to use them in a vertical mounting system, as you can just see in this image. The good thing about bifacial solar panel is that you can generate electricity from both sides of the panel, from rear and the front side. So you can just count on the reflective radiation a bit more than normal panels, because they have some reflective, as you can see in this diagram that is shown, that we have some reflective, that it comes back to the rear side of the panel. With bifacial solar panel, we can just extract energy as much as we can. The bifaciality factor ranges from 60 to 90% with the panels that we have now, the commercial use. And the energy yield improvement base that really depends on the quality and the color of the environment around it, that it affects on the albedo, and finally affect on the reflective component of the radiation, that can change roughly between 5 to 30%. However, it can just be changed by the changing in the bifacial manufacturer industry as well. That's a really good actually compatible method and technology for the vertical, and we can just the good thing is that we can then put them in east-west orientation, And the vertical give us some more flexibility to use different machineries, and then working with the pitches, and also avoiding the mechanical stress, which is due to the high altitude here, is just really clearly gone. If you can go to the next slide. Yes. This one also is very famous, very nice. I really like this type of technology for the solar agrivoltaic system. That's thin film panels. There are many different types. We don't want to go to the physics of them because it takes a lot of time, and I believe that it needs its own webinar time for that. But if we can go for the characteristic of the thin film panel, the first one that you can also see in the image is that they are very flexible. In the method that you can see in this image, a group of researchers tried to round and make a kind of a pipe shape with a solar thin film cell, and then try to have some liquid. For this case, I believe it was water, that it makes this thin film layer a bit cooler and bring up the efficiency. The good thing about this is that they can just manage the radiation that gets through from these modules from the top of the crops, and then they can just optimize the radiation that they need for the crops. The other good thing, the other good and let's say positive characteristic from these thin film solar panels is that they are very light. So you can easily bring them up in the altitude. Any altitude you can just imagine that you can put your panels. It means that you can use it for the crops that they may need a little bit more space, like small trees. So for instance, you don't need to bring them like 2 meters high, so you can just go a bit higher if you need that, and then you can let your tree to grow underneath of this system. It's because of the weight and because of the flexibility, it's very easy to integrate for many different surfaces. For instance, if you want to have a curve shape, dome shape, it's possible to make it. Also, another thing that is very interesting for the thin film solar panel is that they are either transparent or semi-transparent, so you can just use them with a very high transparency. And then that's another way that you can also optimize the radiation that you need for your crops underneath. So yeah, based on the altitude that you can just get from the lightweight characteristic, you can have some machineries that take a bit longer and with a higher altitude, so you can use them, and it can help you to help the farmers actually to use it very easier. If we can go to the next slide. There are some other types as well, so it might not be the same price, I would say. So maybe sometimes we need to pay a bit more, like these two types of the solar panels, that we can say that it's a more or less similar method but different applications. One is just on the top, it's concentrating PV panels. So you need to have a kind of lens on top of your solar cell that you can see it in the image. That's the difference between the normal conventional solar panel and the concentrated ones. And then the area of the solar cell in this case is very small, but you can extract the same amount of energy because you use a kind of a lens. You can see in the photo that they use it on top of the farm. That's actually, this is from EPFL group of research. They just published a very nice paper on that. If you're interested, you can check the reference and citations of our white paper, and you can find this paper. This is good. The only problem is that it's a bit expensive. Also, we can go with the luminescent solar cell concentrator, or the abbreviation is LSCs. That's very interesting technology. I believe that's a very good application for the greenhouse. You can see also in the photo that how you can use the LSCs for the greenhouse, because you can also affect on the color of the light that you may need underneath for your crops. The philosophy behind that is that the sunlight, as you can see it, for instance, in the image downside, is that the sunlight is just shining over the luminescence that you can see it. That's quite close in the visually like to the glass. So you see it like a glass, but it's luminescent. And then the luminescence transfer the light like it goes to the corner and instead of get all of them down. Then you can use some carbon dot or quantum dot technology to lead the radiation both on down and to the corner. So it's really useful method that you can say that, okay, it will be very efficient if I can control the radiation that I need to have in the bottom side and I need to have in the corner. The solar cells can be glued on the corner of your luminescence, and then you will have a kind of a solar PV window. Yeah, this is actually not only using for the Agri-PV, but this is one application that's very famous for the building integrations as well, and it's very interesting. So it could be a really good option, and we can see that there are some already built-in systems with LSCs, as you can see, for instance, in this figure, and there are other things. I know that there's one thing that's done in the Technical University in Eindhoven. We can go to the next slide. But not everything is about module itself. We have some other thing about the mounting system. So mounting system, if we want to compare with the traditional mounting system together with the alternative that we can have for the agrivoltaic, there are a lot of different changes. So we can just definitely go to the little bit higher altitude compared to the ones that previously we had to be close to the land. Also, we can go with the vertical that we discussed it now. We can have some single or double axis solar tracker. Yeah, definitely we could have it for the normal ground-based PV systems, but a bit of higher altitude is possible for the agrivoltaics. And also we discuss about the greenhouse solar, that it's one of the good cases for the agrivoltaic mounting system. So if we go to the next slide. There are some good innovative projects that we found all around the world. In some of the projects, they use the Internet of Things sensors to just enhance the shading based on the shade that they have, and it's needed for their, let's say, crops underneath. So they control the angle of the PV panels by using some Internet of Things sensors, and then maximize or minimize the amount of radiation that they need at that very specific time. It will be a really good combination with the solar forecasting system. And also, it could be a really good way to control your energy demand as well. So it could be a really good combination to meet many different aspects at the same time. Also, there are some... Oh. Yeah, maybe I can just very briefly go to the rest as well. So there are some actually very flexible solar cells or solar modules that can be used as a shade on top of agricultural land or the greenhouse, and that's a startup that they work on that. So they can just control the shading by controlling the amount of the screen that can be open or closed, because it can be rolled very easily. So we just mentioned before that thin film solar panel can just play in the altitude as well, so it can be very easy to install, and it can just help us to have a bit of lighter mounting system as well. So because the panels is not very heavy, then we can just have a lighter mounting system as well. There are some very interesting mounting system that they have some special gutters that it can collect the rainwater. And then they can just use it later for their crops if they want to use it for watering. If we can go to the next slide. I found some very interesting case studies that we can just see how they just finalize and conclude the agrivoltaic systems on their own land. They are from different climates and not necessarily in Europe. That's one from Japan, one from France, and one from US in Arizona area. That we can see that I don't want to go through all of these that you can see in this table, but the only thing that I want to focus is about the water usage. What we can see is that almost all of them, they said that they have some reduction in their water usage. although they say that they had some increase in their crop yield. So with the same amount, with less amount of the water, they had more or less similar amounts of the crops, which is actually a really good deal, I would say, for the farmers, especially in Arizona state, because they said that they were really happy with that. If you would like, we can just read the paper that's also cited underneath. Yeah, you can see in the France, they had the fixed system with 37 degree of the tilt angle, and they had the walnut tree. So it's very interesting that you can just have big trees also with these agrivoltaic systems. So if we go to the next slide, and this is the second last slide. This is based on one of my students' research that he worked on, comparative analysis of the agrivoltaic systems in the Netherlands. He just tried to compare two different systems, one with the vertical PV production and the other one with the single axis tracker for the PV production. And here we can see the difference of the PV production. If you look on the vertical one, that you can see we have different pitches, 6, 10, and 12 meters distance for the pitches. Then there is a very nice comparison between the south-oriented solar panel, the same type of the solar panel here is monocrystalline, and then the vertical ones with different pitches. The only pitch that we had less energy production was the pitch with the 6 meters. But if you have a bit further distance between the rows, then you can have a better production as well. And then I believe that could be better for the machineries. Going back to the single axis tracker for the PV production, we can see that, all of them are just generating much more electricity with any pitch more than the south-oriented solar panel. So if you go to the last slide, so the first question that I want to ask you after all of this is that what do you think about the solar panel? Do you believe that the solar panel is what you can see in this image, and when it's just integrated is what you can see on the grassland over the grassland, or we can have many different types of the solar panels? We can have the thin film, we can have LSCs, and we don't need to put them very densely together. We can just make some distance. We can have some single or double tracker with some distance from each other. And that's the way that we can say agrivoltaic can change the world of the agriculture and the photovoltaic at the same time.
So thank you, Sarah. Maybe I will invite Bas, Kai, and Nabi to also open their cameras and mic. And we're going to go through a little bit of a Q&A. So I invite you to put your questions, especially in the chat function, if possible. I have some issues with the Q&A function. So ideally, please send any question in the chat. And maybe to start, because we already have quite a few questions. First one from Anna Jen, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, is about asking about the functionality and integrity of PV system after a hail event, and what is the stability of PV system in this case. So, I'm guessing we could even widen a little bit the question to the challenge related to operation and maintenance when we have Agri-PV systems, which are maybe a little bit more complex to assess than utility scale type of systems. Do you have some good perspective on how easy to guarantee the reliability of the system and operate maintenance when needed?
Shall I start?
Yes.
The hail stability or the damage you can expect for hail on a PV system in an agricultural setting would be the same as for a normal solar park. And then you have the advantages for trackers, for instance, that you can place them towards the hail, so the hail will glance or glare over the panels instead of hitting them full on. specifically about the hail event. Hail in the Netherlands is probably milder compared to other places in the world. So we don't have many images of broken PV systems on houses or in the fields due to hail. It is an impact, for instance, for greenhouses that often have single layer glass that then breaks and then falls inside. I would almost say one of the advantages is that a solar panel is often a kind of a safety glass. If it fails, if it breaks due to hail or other smaller impacts, it still stays as a single unit. There won't be glass shattered everywhere because of the encapsulant that we use. Yeah, I think for the functionality, integrity, it's not special. The question after that also asks, why would you use panels to protect your crops? Because panels are very, very expensive. Well, you could even argue that so expensive panels are nowadays. But also, it's not that you say I put the PV there because it protects my crops. It's just that I put the PV there because I believe Agri-PV is beneficial and it could reduce my water consumption. It might increase my crop yield, particularly if you look at growing grapes in the south of Europe. The sugar content can be may or not increase too much, and that it then protects my my crops is an additional benefit, because if you would do it in two separate entities, you have a vineyard next to a solar park and that hail comes along, then you maybe break your panels and you have your grapes destroyed. So if you at least can protect one of them by growing the other below, or the same one below, that would be an advantage.
Thank you, Bas. And maybe so we just have another question, which is related to water use reduction linked to PV installation. Do you have measured that essentially the benefits in terms of water use or water retention only happens throughout the whole plot of land, or just in the area that is directly beneath the modules and essentially benefits from the shadowing effect of the plant? Is it just very localized, or do you also see some spillover benefits, essentially, I think is a question.
Yeah, that's a good question. That depends a bit on I would say, the density of the PV system. So if we look at the fruit farms, they roughly have 1 meter panel, 1 meter gap. And in that case, particularly also if the rows run north to south, the shadow will reach the ground or the crops everywhere at one point during the day. So the whole area will be benefited. Also, as I say, the labor conditions feel better, which is really important, right? Because as people, we feel things. We not go out with a temperature gauge and say, "Hey, temperature is fine, but I feel rotten." Then you still think not good. So the benefit is everywhere. The microclimate, half an umbrella still keeps you drier than no umbrella at all. So I think the benefits will be everywhere. However, if we would go to things like the vertical systems, where you go to spacings 10, 12 meters, it will be less. And it also depends whether your, how do you say, what damages you? If it's the light reaching the ground at noon, then in a vertical system, 12 meter spacing, yes, you don't have a change. If you ever have problems with wind taking away your moisture, so increasing the evaporation of the plants, then we know that this also happens. I think the results in France, where they were growing quite a lot of different crops at rather wide strips, so 10-meter distance, they showed that the local wind speeds are reduced because of the PV. They basically work the same way as hedges would do. But then you have many of those small hedges every 10 meters. So yeah, I think it could benefit the whole site.
Yeah, thank you, Bas. Maybe I think that could be a question a little bit more for Sarah to give you a bit of respite. There's one question about do we have some information about the effect of things like pesticides or other types of intrants or materials used in agriculture on the solar module, so especially on degradation or negative impact, or maybe even positive, especially asking in the case of thin film, I guess, considering the option of reaction between a potential chemical and the thin film.
Yeah, of course. Actually, I'm not sure about the thin film. That I cannot say by heart that the studies that I just read before are for the thin film, but in general, it was about agrivoltaics. I've read many papers that they mentioned that they just reduced in the amount of the pesticide. But to be honest, I'm not still convinced yet that how and what can be the effect of just minimizing that. But maybe we can go back to the new microclimate that can be made after having these solar panels on top of the agrivoltaic on the agriculture. So having a little bit of shade can help us to have a bit more moisture, and then it can help us to have a better microclimate for the crops. On the other side, we have some problems for the panels. So definitely it has some negative effect on the panels because we are just absorbing some moisture underneath of the panel. I'm still waiting for some agrivoltaic system to be a bit longer on top of the crops, and then we can just have a better understanding about the degradation. My expectation is that the degradation is a little bit faster, but not very much. A little bit faster compared to the ground-based PV systems. I believe maybe Kai can have some more extra information because they have some systems that is already ongoing for several years. So maybe they have some outcomes out of that.
For Agri-PV, you mean?
Yes.
Well, I think the systems we are building at the moment, new Agri-PV systems. The systems that have been built are, mainly the ones that Bas was referring to under fruit. Other Agri-PV systems are still in development. Development of solar park take many years, and I think we still need quite a lot of work for that. But we have test fields being built where we compare east, west, south, vertical, and tracking systems. Well, we start with ecological research, and we can also monitor the performance of these configurations. We even have two different types of modules that we compare, and we want to. We will be building also for agriculture, and we start with pastures where we also compare vertical and tracker systems. So then we will build like digital twins, and we will be able to monitor the degradation. Obviously, degradation is a slow process, so I think we need some years for that answer to arrive. However, soiling differences in agricultural activities, that is something that we can pick up more quickly, obviously. Yeah. Bas, do you want to add something?
Some of the farmers that we've spoken to also outside of the survey, they all have so they don't have principal objections to using herbicides, pesticides, or whatever. But if they can reduce it, they would love to. So things that they talk about is if you have an orchard with small trees and you can keep the tree, so the wood itself, dry, that would probably be a benefit. But with all things in nature, if you take out one pest, or if you reduce the conditions for one pest, probably something else pops up. But fungicide is something that was mentioned that's being less applied under PV than under normal cultivation. But they need does the agricultural practice harm the PV? I certainly would not hope so, because also think about how bad that pesticide must be and how much is going up if it would damage your PV panel from the bottom.
Yeah, thank you all. Maybe we have time for two more questions. Maybe one more on the technical side. I think for Nabi and Sarah, There's a question about what are your expectations essentially for PV modules for designed for Agri-PV that let visible light go through, so from 400 to 700 nanometers. In terms of market, is this a good potential? Are these the right wavelengths essentially for agricultural productivity as well?
Yeah, maybe I can just start and then Navi can continue. Actually, that's a really key question, because these days we are talking about new manufacturing for the Agri-PV, and then the problem that we have is that yeah, the spectrum that's needed for the crops and also for the solar panel has a really long overlap.
Mm.
And then we need to make a decision that do we need to have this irradiation all of the time for the crops, or we can just share this irradiation from the solar panels and the crops. There are some studies that it's ongoing, especially using some quantum dots to control this irradiation spectrum, but it's still in the research phase. So it's too early that I can say that yeah, we can just use it in the agrivoltaics. But I'm not sure if there are some other things, some other methods other than the quantum dot, or just using this kind of the very physics behind that, maybe with some easier technologies these days that it's using. I know that Nabi knows a lot about agrivoltaics on the greenhouse, and I really would like to hear him as well, that if he knows something that we can just use that for this reason.
Well, the major solution that today is applied is the density. You know, how the density, of course, that there is always a trade-off between the electricity that we can produce and the number of panels that we can use, and also the radiation that we can have. So far, if we talk about just the classical crystalline solar panel, of course, that the only solution is to have something that where we consider the density of the solar panels. However, if we move forward, we can think about certain thin film and certain also the way how we can make the transmittance for these kind of things. Like that, we can, I would say, play with this. This is the only thing that I can say regarding these kind of things, is whether we look into the thin film and then we have, but again, it's always a problem is how much electricity you would like to produce, because efficiency of the modules, or how we can have as a light. But at the end, I would say that we have to adapt, because we have not, there's no universal solution. We have to put the solution and the right solution for the right panel for the right crops that we have to do. We all know that there are different studies that have been made worldwide that they show that not, for instance, all the crops benefits from the shade on the top.
Mm-hmm.
On the top. So this is the big trade-off.
Yeah, thank you. I think the question you covered it quite well. It was maybe to explain to some of the audience that might be a bit less expert on PV, whether transparent solar panels were coming to market, and so far that's not really the main driver. It's a little bit more, let's say, conventional type of technologies. Because we're still working on developing essentially transparent technologies, which we space out a bit more to let the light go through. And then for a final question, yes, Kai?
Yeah, I before we are closing, we have one last minute. I think one of the big problems about Agri-PV and how to the limitation is the permitting, right? And also like the way we can define the permit such that that all parties know what they can build and not build. I want to point out that in the paper, we have also calculated for all these farms that Bas investigated the amount of light that was divided between PV and the crops. And that is something, it's in figure 11. And this, I think this is maybe a way, if we know, we can very easily divide or calculate how much light is on the crops and how much we use for the PV. If we can use this to determine what Agri-PV is, we get a lot of freedom for the design, and we just say, well, this is the amount of light we need for Agri-PV, and how you do that, that is for the project developers to figure out, and whatever technology you can find to make it work. But this is the amount of light, that's the essential resource for that. And of course, there are other factors about how much wind and interception, but we believe that light is the dominant part in this growth factors. And yeah, maybe this can help to design solar parks and provide a good basis for permitting. We use that already for ground irradiance in the Netherlands for nature inclusive solar parks. So that is just one last element that I want to bring to the table.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a very important precision. And maybe just a final question, although we're reaching the end of our time, but it's targeting the very maybe most important, let's say, component of the agrivoltaic system, which is the farmers. And the question was basically, what are the major challenges farmers face during the cultivation time with agrivoltaics? So does it make essentially exploitation harder for the crops? What's basically the feedback that you have from farmers you've talked to? And maybe going a bit beyond, do you see that they would recommend to other farmers or some of their colleagues to actually implement such solutions? And I guess that's especially for Bas and Kay, who are leading on the
thanks.
survey.
They almost all would recommend it to their neighbors, but they are also very, very honest. They say there are things that we don't know. They are also very open, so they're not. Whereas, I mean, we as scientists, we sometimes want to sit on our own knowledge. We don't want to share unless we figured it out completely. These farmers are more like, oh, this worked for me, or this didn't work for me. So they're completely happy to share their knowledge with their neighbors, with their colleagues. What really is the challenge during cultivation? So they already took the big hurdle of getting the permit or getting a project developer and getting agreements with everyone involved. Is that they have to learn again, or they have to adapt their learning. They've learned from the generations before how you do farming under conditions as common in wherever you are, and then suddenly someone puts a shading pattern on your crops. It's as if you're used to do field farming and suddenly you have to do agroforestry. You're not used to that. Or if you always work with irrigation and suddenly you're working in peatland and your crops are drowning. So they really have to learn these things. So where they normally would pick up things because of their experience, their expertise, they would now have to rethink again. So that's really, I would say, the biggest challenge. Maybe also making sure that the particular crops that you harvest at once, that it's homogeneously ripened. And yeah, I think I already answered the bit about would they recommend it to their colleagues, right? It's
thank you, Bas. I think that's an interesting perspective. A good willingness to test and try. Obviously, we need to deliver the right technical solutions for them to be willing to try them. So yeah, thank you all for a very interesting discussion. This webinar will be available. The recording will be available. The presentation will be shared And you can find on the link that is appearing on the screen, but you will have this link in the shared presentations, the full white paper from the ETIP Integrated Working Group. And thank you all for following this discussion.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.